Jock Colville immediately summoned to Chartwell Churchill's friends, the press barons Lords Camrose, Beaverbrook, and Bracken. Together, they conspired to gag the press. Not a word about the stroke was published. The British public and Parliament were told the Prime Minister was suffering from exhaustion. During his convalescence, Churchill brooded about whether to resign. He was 78. But typically, he set himself a challenge. If he could deliver a speech at the Tory conference 4 months away, he would stay on as Prime Minister. In October 1953, Churchill took the conference stage in Margate to make the speech that would decide his political future.
When he stood up, I can remember we taking in a breath and thinking, and fingers crossed, I can't bear this, I can't bear it.
A few years ago, nationalization was, among socialists, the cure-all for social and economic difficulties. Now, keeping to yourselves, there is a very general feeling that it is an utter flop.
He delivered it without fault. Tears were pouring down our face with relief and with pride at the way he performed. And he was pleased with himself, too.
Back at the helm, Churchill was able at last to travel to Bermuda for the long-awaited meeting with Eisenhower. But his hopes of ending the Cold War all but died. Eisenhower still refused to consider any peace talks with the Soviets. Churchill realized he no longer had the personal power to influence world events. He was exhausted and suddenly appeared very old. Calls for his resignation became louder. His heir apparent, Anthony Eden, was heard to cry, "Oh God, I wish the old man would go."
There were moments when Anthony Eden was so exasperated. And Churchill would often make promises. I'll go to next spring. I'll go to after the budget next year. Then there'll be an election. And I don't believe in fag-end governments. So it wouldn't be good for you, Anthony, to take over at the end of my government. And then I think there were 3 or 4 postponements of his retirement.
Finally, when all hope of a peace summit between America and the Soviet Union vanished, so did Churchill's reason to remain as Prime Minister. It was time to go. On the 4th of April, 1955, Winston and Clementine hosted a farewell dinner at number 10. The following day, Churchill was driven to Buckingham Palace, where he offered his resignation.
I am getting much older. Now the stimulus of responsibility and power has fallen from me. I totter along in the shades of retirement.
By 1958, Churchill had completed his final book, A History of the English-Speaking Peoples. He chose to end it before the First World War, when Britain and its empire was still a great power.
He was in a dark mood, he was very depressed. And I tried to cheer him up. I said, how can you be so depressed when you've had a career which nobody else in the world can have had? The wars and all, and which you'd emerge triumphant. And he said, yes, what you say is accurate, but I've worked very hard all my life, and I've achieved a great deal, in the end, to achieve nothing. He wanted a Great Britain in a peaceful world. Didn't get either. Very sad. He thought that everything he'd done had been in vain.
Churchill's mood improved in the warmth of the south of France. The villa of his friend Max Beaverbrook became a second home. Churchill would spend his days immersed in his favourite pursuit, painting. Happy are the painters, he said, for they shall not be lonely. In September 1958, Winston and Clementine celebrated their 50th wedding anniversary in Monte Carlo with their son Randolph and granddaughter Arabella. Churchill and Randolph had long had a stormy relationship.
In the latter years, invariably, their meetings would end up in rows. And my grandfather